Washington State operates the largest ferry system in the entire country with 21 ferries, but that is not enough with delays and unreliable sailings. Recently, Governor Ferguson awarded a massive project to build 3 new hybrid ferries with the first deliveries in 2029. The governor giving that contract worth $714 million to Eastern Shipbuilding, a Florida company, beating out a local company, Nichols Brothers, based in Whidbey Island. The bid from Nichols Brothers was charging the state $350 million more than the Florida company. One lawmaker telling me it's not the fault of Nichols Brothers. He says it comes down to state taxes and regulations. I'm joined by State Representative Andrew Barkas. Andrew, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your program. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I wanted to invite you because you were fired up about this on social media. One detail that was eye-opening, at least to me, was that the Washington company came in around $350 million higher. So we're just talking about even just a couple of $1 million more. And this is despite having a 13% credit for home state construction. With that said, you almost can't blame the governor for going with the Florida company that is going to save Washington taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars here.
Well, yes and no. First of all, I think it was, as I said in my release and have said many times, I think it's unfortunate. It's an unfortunate state of how we are in Washington that we cannot manufacture, we can't compete. And this business now going to Florida, another state that's going to reap the benefits. The cost was higher because of all of the requirements from environmental to labor to everything else for our local shipbuilder. But the piece that we were missing, and I was hoping to have a broader conversation with the governor, is what was going to be returned, the hundreds of jobs, the sales tax, all of the other revenues that would come in that would offset that difference between the two, even though it was a higher difference. The other piece is I'm not convinced, even with what we're hearing from this other proposal and bid over the course of time, that we're not going to see this rise to that same level of expense. They're $400 and some odd million a copy now is what we're hearing for the first boat. So is it truly as off as we thought between the two bids? I'm not sure. The conversation did not happen between the legislature and the governor's office for this final decision.
One thing is clear, though, it is going to impact Washington workers. They're losing out on this massive project. We're talking about hours of work. How many workers do you think in Washington are impacted by this?
Oh, there are hundreds. We have a long tradition of shipbuilding in Washington State, and Nichols Brothers in Freeland on Whidbey Island has a long-standing. They were part of the construction of the last 2 vessels that were built here in Washington State. They were gearing up, along with the Port of Everett and others, to continue that tradition for decades to come. The ability to build this boat, and then the ferry system as a whole, we're talking about 10, 15 boats over the course of the next 20 plus years that are needed to restore the fleet for the next generation. So it's hundreds and hundreds of jobs, not only around this project, but all the ancillary jobs that it affects, all the suppliers and supporters and manufacturers, the restaurants, the businesses. There's a lot of impact. That's why we had the Build in Washington provision before. Now, I was supportive of us looking throughout the entirety of the country to see what would be competitive and hopefully drive that back here. The truth is, we only ended up with 2 bids out of a procurement process that was 14 some odd shipbuilders. Again, that should tell you a lot about the state of Washington and the problems that we have in attracting and doing manufacturing here in our own backyard.
Yeah, and you brought up Nichols Brothers, and Nichols is the one that lost out, and then you had Eastern Shipbuilding. That's the Florida company that won this bid. But moving forward, you're saying that it's the state's fault in part over the years with extra regulations and taxes that has created this issue. What needs to happen then moving forward? I mean, you're a lawmaker. You've been in that position for a really long time. So, this is not an issue that just came up overnight. What needs to happen then?
No. Well, I think we have to undo the mess that has been the last decade plus. If you go back just a few short years, I've been in this now 10 years. I've been the ranking member on transportation. I've been highly involved in this entire ferry process and dilemma and crisis that we've had. If you go back just a few short years, we were ready to build 4 boats here in Washington State. The governor changed that direction when he decided to put his climate agenda above everything else and electrify the entire fleet, which changed the trajectory of what we were doing in building boats. The cost went extraordinarily high, not only for the boats, but all the other ancillary things that have to do with that. I think it's time that we have to sit down. I think Governor Ferguson has an opportunity to change course. I think that we need to have a broader conversation between the legislature and the executive branch on what we're going to do moving forward. We just had a meeting here in Seattle just a couple days ago, the Transportation Committee, where we had a briefing about what the state of it is. We have a lot more to do. I mean, in order to continue this agenda of electrification, we're talking about hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to electrify the entire system in order to do these boats and convert them. We just converted the Wenatchee to 2 years, $130 million to do that. I think there's a better way, and that is what I've been talking about, building boats like we've built in the past, looking at more efficient, cleaner diesel propulsion systems. Talk about electrification sometime down the road. I don't know how we're going to pay for this. We have just seen the most incredible taxation in this last session, the transportation arena, to try to keep things going. There's not a lot more money on the table to come to fruition. That was the major discussion that we had just a couple days ago.
Yeah. Well, State Rep Andrew Barkis, thank you for joining us. It is a very difficult topic, but I appreciate your time.
So $350 million, that's a lot of money. So what is the breakdown? Why so much more money from the Washington company bid?
You're right, and that's the big question. So I did hear back from Nichols Brothers after I spoke with Representative Barkis. The biggest reason is the state-mandated wage for this project, which averages $58 an hour. Then you have state-mandated programs like The Apprentice, DEI, and veteran-owned business participation that they have to meet. And finally, the significant increase in B&O taxes that was recently passed by the legislature. Now, CEO Gavin Higgins says some of those mandated programs have good intentions, but he also says it's just making it really impossible for Washington shipbuilders to stay afloat and competitive for Washington shipbuilders. Now, he also sent a statement to us, quote, "What baffles us is why the governor wouldn't choose to reinvest Washington taxpayers' money back into the Washington economy, where the boat effectively pays for itself. Rather, he'd spend it at a Florida shipyard that is going to take a year longer to build the first boat than was in the WSF request for proposal and no return to Washington." By the way, David, we did reach out to the governor's office on this and shared the statement from Barkis expressing his frustration over his decision. We didn't get a response specific to that criticism, but we only received the initial press release of Ferguson announcing that contract.
All right, well, people who ride the ferries just want the boat, but hearing that it's going to take a year longer on top of the money, that is a little bit troubling.
It is.
Thanks, Hannah.